Well, hello, everybody. Now, as for the entire aviation industry, for private charter operators, COVID-19 has been a major shock to the system. Across the world, travelers have been unable to fly, largely, or they've had no reason to fly, or they couldn't justify the expense of flying as the global economy has atrophied. But beyond the immediate shock came the realization that the flexibility and the responsiveness that chartered aircraft provide just can't be beaten. And especially when airline capacity is severely constrained or it's a very unattractive choice to passengers who are concerned about health risks. So joining us today is Dave Edwards, who's the CEO of the Air Charter Association. And this group represents more than 250 companies worldwide, including aircraft operators and charter brokers, airports, FBOs, and a wide array of support specialists. So, Dave, the Air Charter Association has existed for a bit over 70 years, I think, and I know you've worked in the industry just about your entire career. Is it going too far to say that the challenge posed to the industry today is just about the most serious it's faced and is truly unprecedented?
It's a very strange time for all of us. I think, as you say, my background is pretty much all charter operations. So, lived and breathed that one. I think if you go back to the sort of 2008 time, there was a willingness to travel. There just perhaps wasn't the money to pay for it. Now we've got a scenario where there is the money to actually pay for it, but this really strange environment of we're not exactly sure if we're meant to be traveling. And I think most people are sort of, weighing up the risks of most things that they do. And that's probably the challenge is that, business aviation particularly is filling a niche that the airlines have obviously had to remove themselves from on specific routes. Some of the air charter industry that we represent is obviously doing remarkably well. Certainly the whole aircraft charter stuff has been bringing a lot of repatriations home. Mm-hmm. Air cargo has been doing some amazing work supporting obviously healthcare professionals around the world and bringing PPE supplies in. But I think it's more sort of, it's not so much today, it's looking forward towards the end of the year is where I start to get a little bit more concerned, I think, about what will happen then.
Yes, and to your point, I mean, this goes beyond just straight economics. It comes down to personal choices and, that's sort of a sociological conundrum, I suppose, that none of us can really unravel. And you mentioned some of the things that people in the industry have been doing to keep some flying going. But overall, what sort of toll has this taken on your members? What sort of things have they had to do to weather the storm? I'm guessing in some cases it's involved furloughing staff, for example. But how, generally speaking, have they coped with this?
Well, you know us well. We're a fairly positive industry. We talk a good game a lot of the time. So whenever there's a sort of downward spike, we still talk about all the good things that are happening. I think if we're being realistic, it's been a pretty awful time for aviation in general, and that's been mirrored across the business aviation world as well. As you know, we now have the partnership with Winx, which is providing free data effectively to all our members, which hopefully will be useful for them in looking for opportunities and things like that. But if you look at those statistics, obviously we are down something like 80% straight away on where we were this time 12 months ago. It's recovered over the last few weeks, but we're still, as I say, we are a very positive industry, so we're still talking about how great it is that we're up on where we were, but we're still only somewhere around the sort of 45% of what we were 12 months ago. So yes, it's positive in that it's not zero, but this industry needs 100% to be actually making money. We're now at the 45%. So as you say, the fact that people like the UK government have provided the furlough scheme, governments across Europe have provided tax incentives or tax breaks effectively, plus some element of variations to that furlough scheme. That's been really important. The challenge that I think has sort of come of that is that it is delaying something for the industry. So we've gone through a period of furloughing or government support. We've gone through a period of tax breaks. We've gone through a period where probably aircraft lessors have been willing to discuss terms. Office rent has been something that's been negotiable. All of that's great until the kind of tax breaks and the furlough schemes start to wind down. And that, to me, is where the challenge is going to lie, because if demand hasn't risen at the same pace, we're going to be back to the same industry we had before in terms of size and scale, but we won't demand to support it. So that's why as much as I sound like the prophet of doom here, I'm really conscious that towards the end of the year, I think that's where the main challenge is going to come. And so that as an association is kind of where we're focusing our efforts at the moment.
Yeah, it's a good point.
You look at the average age of a business jet owner, and it's not, as much as Instagram would love to pretend it is, it's not people in their 30s and 40s. It is people in their 60s and 70s. The challenge there, thankfully, I haven't got to 60 or 70 yet. But, my dad has been locked down, I think, now for the best part of 4 months.
Yeah.
I don't suspect he'll be leaving the house for another 3 or 4 months before, and it's that challenge, because just because you've got the resources to buy a private jet, or you are leading a company that's invested in a great business tool, you've still got that challenge of actually, is this worth the risk? Do I really know what I'm letting myself in for? And it's not just us, it's every industry, I guess, in the world, but it's a massive challenge.
And of course, it goes beyond the actual flight. It's not just a question of, are you willing to get on an aircraft and go somewhere? It's what risk are you exposing yourself to when you get to wherever it is you've flown to?
Yeah, I mean, the members have gone sort of, above and beyond really in terms of what they've been offering to help minimise the impact of COVID. None of us, unfortunately, can get rid of it. But, in terms of the ways the FBOs have responded in making it a zero-touch environment, certainly the way the operators across the board have gone for PPE, the disinfecting of the aircraft, really positive things to do to get us flying as quickly as we can. But as you say, once you get in the car at the other end, we're out of the loop at that point, and that then comes down to the hotels and the offices that you're visiting. So it is, there's all these sort of perfect storm issues on there to deal with before we worry about just what we've done to get flying again.
Yes, good point. And you mentioned earlier, this conundrum of, do we individually and collectively know whether we're allowed to travel or how we're allowed to travel? Part of that, I suppose, is this sort of confusing array, well, confusing to me at least, of government restrictions and responses in different countries. For example, in the UK, we're currently under a 14-day quarantine requirement, which I know has been quite contentious. But it seems to me the industry probably struggles to look at where it's even allowed to fly people to and under what terms and what might change. Is that part of the sort of confidence problem, really, that it just isn't clear from any day to day what is permitted and what might not be permitted?
Yeah, in terms of, again, members have gone out and set up their own websites with sort of instant access to what the guidance is. But as you say, it's so nuanced. It can be read in entirely different ways by different people. It would be great to see a sort of blanket, certainly within the EU itself. It would be great to see some blanket decisions made. My own gut feeling, is if you were to carve out business aviation because of the goodness that it actually does to the world, if we could carve out below 19 seats, which is a traditional carve out for a lot of things in aviation, but then the risk of the 2 or 3 or 4 passengers who generally are flying on those flights carrying COVID into another country is so small, and particularly, as I say, with some of the restrictions and some of the processes that operators have put into place. If we use those, that risk is so low. It would be great to see that kind of blanket thing. Europe is opening up, or the EU is opening up slowly, which is great.
Yes.
I'm sure we're going to come on to UK quarantine and the fact that as Europe is opening up, the island of the UK is shutting itself down quite quickly. Yeah,
absolutely. No, I mean, and that does indeed speak to this point about, the UK through Brexit having chosen this separate path, which, it seems that the country is then particularly exposed at a time like this, when reason would seem to tell you that it's a good idea to actually try and do things in much the same way as your neighbouring countries. I mean, is the UK quarantine, as contentious as it is, sort of almost a snapshot of the difficulties that the UK creates for itself, if you like, by going down this path, particularly for aviation?
It's obviously, as the CEO of a trade association, I have to be very sort of sitting on the fence almost about views. That said, this is one of the most strange political decisions I think I've ever witnessed. The challenge we sometimes have as an industry is that the airlines, the commercial scheduled airlines, and the Airport Operators Association, those kind of organisations are much larger than us collectively. They have a much more powerful voice. So business aviation generally, as much as we try and lobby as hard as we can, we are a very, very quiet voice in the bigger scheme of things. But when the airlines and the airport operators can't actually get any sort of common sense really going into the quarantine negotiations, for want of a better word, that kind of is slightly baffling, I think. The challenge is, if it had come in at the very beginning, I'm sure we would have all gone, do you know, that makes sense, this is fine. But to have got to the point where we are, to bring it in now, when after which point all of the operators, all of the brokers, all of the airports, all of the FBOs have got all of their procedures in place. So, as I say, the risk of transmission of COVID by this point within our environment is very small. We have that COVID recovery that needs to happen now, and we have to be looking towards the future of Brexit, because it's very clear that the negotiations are not going very well. I think probably as we're talking, Boris is sitting down with his counterparts in the EU to hopefully thrash out a trade deal. But regardless of the kind of political machinations of that bit, all businesses need to be getting themselves ready for the end of this. And we need that level playing field as much as we possibly can on both sides. And bear in mind, our members are on both sides of this.
Yes, we do have to remind ourselves of that. That's a good point.
Yeah, the accent might give, not be terribly EU, but certainly at the moment we're very much part of it. And as I say, regardless of which side of the Brexit fence you're on as well, we just need to be in a position that we can do our best for both sides by actually getting travel going, and particularly from the UK's perspective, it just seems such a strange decision at this point to almost shoot ourselves in the foot when we do it as safely as we possibly can.
Yeah, good point. And moving forward, I mean, yes, okay, we're probably all going to have to be, we're going to have to really hold our nerve as these negotiations continue for the rest of the year. But what we do know already is that the UK has determined that it come what may, it's leaving EASA. It's not going to be part of that. Does that sort of give you concern in the sense that, if this UK quarantine decision could be taken in such an apparently sort of abstract way, that other sort of aviation regulatory issues might be handled similarly, and that we might find, all the concerns about added cost and difficulty for the UK being outside of EASA may actually prove to be just the burden that some said it would be?
It's a surprise that we've left the UK has left EASA. I think most of us thought that something would happen that would allow the country to remain part of it. If you get back to the granular detail of it, we probably didn't have a choice in the UK because we're not a member state. We could have become an associate member, but perhaps that wouldn't necessarily tie in with what the idea was behind Brexit. The thing that probably is quite sort of comforting, if you like, is that the work that we've done with the CAA over the past few years, they're very much ready for a hard Brexit. So they've worked on the principle of it was going to be sort of the most extreme example, if you like, of Brexit. And they had a no-deal plan in place from day one. They resourced it properly. They put a lot of work into it. So from that perspective, I'm not so concerned about the actual how it will work day to day. I'm pretty sure that we're all sort of comfortable with getting there. But to go from a position, obviously, of a devolved authority, if you like, having limited powers compared to EASA, to being fully back into a regulatory authority that covers everything to do with aviation in the country, it's to start that up from scratch effectively on day one is quite a hill to climb. So there is some work to be done there. I think the recruitment is probably ongoing, but deep down, I think the UK will be okay. But okay is very different to obviously fully bells and whistles performing at a full level. It's an understandable decision, taking a step back from it, but whether it's the right decision, I guess only time will tell, unfortunately.
Now, before the crisis, the COVID-19 crisis gripped this industry, I know that you at the Air Charter Association were very focused on confronting the dangers posed by illegal charter. And of course, it's good news that potentially more travelers might now gravitate from the airlines to using private charter. But I suppose there could be some concern that might lead to actually an uptick in illegal flights, especially if some of these new customers truly don't understand the difference between legal and illegal charter operations. So presumably you're not you haven't lost any of your focus on that issue. You still feel that's something you've got to show some leadership on.
Yeah, very much so. It might have slowed down. It's still carried on where it could. It's not gone away. Certainly, from a regulator's point of view, we've seen a lot of good things over whether they were just uniquely timed or whether they were as a result of the SADA crash. We'll let time tell. But certainly, the change within the CAA that we've seen has been great. We've seen a lot more focus on illegal charters. Mm-hmm. They have worked with all of the associations extensively, I would say. They've formed an internal team across the CAA, which has had some, pretty interesting results to begin with. So that was great. That was really positive moves. The FAA in America have done, again, some brilliant things in the last 12 months. They've really gone out of their way to make a legal charter quite a hot topic for them. Lots of new regulations come out. And probably the best bit is lots of explanation of the regulations. So it's sort of aimed at private pilots, aimed at entry-level commercial pilots, first jobbers, to understand what the regulation is and why it's there, which is, something that we've called on regulators to do for quite a while now. Mm-hmm. It's just, a lot of people do trip into the illegal charter sort of gap. Mm-hmm. It's not, they've not willingly gone out of their way, but just by not really understanding the regulations, mm-hmm. which is no defense, but we're being fair to people. Mm-hmm. People have sometimes tripped up. So at least now we're starting to see regulators sort of clarifying for people. And as I said, particularly the FAA have been quite different over the last year. It's been great to see that focus. And of course, if you can get big regulators, extensive regulators, to start making this a focus, naturally that flows into the other regulators around the world who either use EASA or use FAA as the base of their own regulations. So it's not stopped, it's not gone away. It's still something we talk to the media about extensively. And it remains a strong focus. It's still happening. It won't go away. And as you say, it will come back. So as long as the education piece from the regulators and from us and our fellow associations who came into it with us carries on, then that's a good start to all of this.
Yes, you talked about regulation. I mean, in terms of the sort of front lines, do you think the legitimate charter operators now feel that, if they call out suspect activity, it will get policed in the right way, that they have perhaps some confidence that, if they draw attention to things that don't appear to be quite right, somebody will take a look at it?
Yeah, I think the sort of the interesting thing from our point of view is that all the regulators do a lot of work on this. They have done before, and to us they seem to be doing more now. They don't talk about it, and I find that quite a strange thing because, mm-hmm. Presumably if you're going after knife crime in a city, you talk about what you're doing so that the message gets out ahead of the arrests happening. And the same with this, if pilots who are doing illegal things actually knew how much work was going in by the authorities particularly around Europe and obviously in America, I think it would just make them just think for a second, is this worth it? Certainly the policing of larger events where you've seen a lot of aircraft gathering for specific events has increased, noticeably increased. And again, it just gets the message out there that, even if you sort of are tipped off, if you like, that the inspectors are around, it's a good message for the industry that actually, it protects. So operators who pay a lot of money into regulators start to see something being policed. It gives them the comfort that actually this isn't all in vain, and takes away that fear, which is kind of where we'd all got to. And putting my operator hat back on here, if there was never any prosecutions for illegal charter, well, why have I got an AOC? What's the point of having an AOC?
Right.
I might as well just hit the one fine every so often, because that's actually a really cheap way of getting money in for flying aeroplanes. So that I'm glad that sort of message is out there. It just would be nicer if they just talk a bit more, because it's a really positive thing that they're policing the industry. That's nobody's going to argue with that, apart from people who don't want to be policed. But there you go.
Yeah. You said at the beginning that people in your industry, tend to take a positive view of things, which is probably just what's needed at the moment. And I think we can classify this conversation as largely glass half full. So let's try and keep that morale up in the right zone, despite everything. Good stuff. Well, Dave, thank you for that. Thank you for spending time with us. Of course, things change week to week, so if we may, we'll catch up with you again in the future as things unfold throughout the summer, but it's always good to chat with you.
Very welcome. Good to talk to you.
Thanks for watching this AIN video. Please like, subscribe, and share it if you've enjoyed it. Also, visit ainonline.com for all the latest on the aviation industry.